Wonderful to have everyone. I imagine there may still be some people logging on, but since it's 7:30, we want to get started here in a minute and welcome our guest educator here over the next 3 weeks, Rabbi Joshua Cahan, the author of a relatively recent new Hagaddah, or put together, published Yedid Nefesh, which I know are on order. We have a number of copies coming to our library. If you don't have the book yet, and I'm sure Rabbi Cahan can share if you want to purchase your own copy, where to get one online. But we're excited, a wonderful teacher and educator. And I know you've joined us, I think, in the past for our Thursday Lunch and Learn. And wonderful to have you with us to help us get ready. It feels, we just celebrated Purim this past week, but already time, believe it or not, to start preparing for our next holiday, for Pesach. And so thank you. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Rabbi Cahan.
Great. Thank you so much. It's really an honor to be with you, to talk about my Hagaddah, talk about the Hagaddah. I guess those two have kind of become so intermeshed for me over the last couple of years that it's hard to separate them. As I was mentioning sort of when we came on, I feel like I have all sorts of so many different connections to Bnei Jeshurun, to the shul, to the community, and so it's just really nice to be able to connect in this way and to share my Haggadah with you. There are a few things that I'm going to put in the chat in a minute. One of them I will put maybe, yeah. Toward the end, I will put in, if you don't already have it, the link for ordering the Haggadah. But I will leave that to the end. But I do have a source sheet that I will share in a few minutes. It's a Google Doc that you can kind of open up. I will also screen share when we're talking about it, but you can kind of also go through it yourselves. We have 3 sessions together, and so I want to. Sometimes I'll kind of try to cram some of the different aspects of talking about and sort of engaging with the Haggadah all into kind of a shorter time. I want to use the time that we have to kind of draw out some of the different pieces. So my plan is that tonight, I want to talk a little bit about kind of the background of the Haggadah and some of the texts that really shape its structure and really kind of help us to understand its sort of guiding concept. And to really appreciate that, because really what the Haggadah as a liturgy text is about is often hard to pin down. I want to talk sort of broadly about that bigger question tonight. Next week, I'm going to spend some time really looking kind of more specifically in detail at the Haggadah and some of the familiar texts, and to kind of really put some shape to what some of those texts are really saying. Some of them, when you actually look at them in the proper context, are fairly surprising. There are a lot of pieces to this text that, just in the process of working on putting together this document, I have come to a totally new appreciation of, really shifting understanding of. And so I want to share some of those with you, because I think that as you go through your Seder, having some of those associations and feeling a sense of clarity about what each of those pieces is doing as part of this ritual just opens up so many different ways to conduct it. And to think about what you want to have happen at your Seder. And then in our last session, we will talk about using the Haggadah as a liturgy, using the Haggadah as a physical book, to think about how to be more intentional about planning a ritual and experience that really is really kind of meets your image, and really lives up to all of its possibility. I'm going to ask those of you who are able and willing to have your cameras on. It's easier for me to talk to a screen full of faces. So I would appreciate that. It certainly. I want to also have a sense that that you're following what I'm saying. If there's something that you have a question about, or have a thought to share about, you can feel free to do the little hand raising thing. Or if I don't notice it, just feel free to kind of unmute yourself and call my attention. I welcome you to kind of chime in and share your thoughts as we go along. Okay, but before I dive into kind of the background, I'm gonna start with a little bit of my sort of elevator pitch about my Haggadah itself, because I always get, anytime I talk about it, the first question people always ask, and it started when I was first told friends in shul that I was working on this, is, well, what's your shtick? What's your take? Why is your Haggadah different? Why does the world need your Haggadah? And for a while, I made the mistake of answering that question. And then I realized that the answer actually is really the answer to another question. If you think about, most of you, I would imagine, have Haggadot that you don't like. Haggadot that maybe you used and found frustrating, or maybe Haggadot that you're still using because it's the one you have a set of, but you're like, oh, we're still using this one. Lots and lots of us have a really hard time finding the Haggadah is like, oh, this is the one that I could just use. And I want you to just kind of call to mind one of those Haggadot that you don't like to use, that you find frustrating, and just think about, well, what about it makes it difficult? And with that in mind, I'm going to show you a couple of pages. Okay. This is a page from a different night. Oh, wait, share. Are you now seeing this? Okay. This is a page from a different night. Now, what do you notice about this page that, and those of you who've used different night, what makes it challenging to use your Seder? And by the way, I would say, like, and with this has been a great contribution to the Jewish community, and Noam Sion is a fantastic teacher. And yet, what do you notice in this page? Or when you think about a different night? Go ahead.
Each year the font seems smaller and smaller.
Absolutely. The font is very small, and the font is very small despite the pages being huge. So the font, it feels, these letters seem smaller because they're on such a big page. What else?
Well, I love this Hagaddah, and I've used it to run a Seder in the past with it was a Zoom Seder, so it made it real easy.
Right.
But there are so many choices and so much to choose from. There's no way you can do even a third of it.
I would say absolutely. There's
But
so much.
but it does give you a lot of choices.
Yes.
Because I mean, I literally spent hours in advance deciding what to include and what to exclude.
Right. And that's great. I mean, that is why this became this how it became so ubiquitous in Jewish community. It's also been around for almost 30 years. I know every single story and every single poem and every single joke. Uh, and After a certain number of years of, and there are people for whom it's eternally engaging, and that's great. But for me, certainly, after a certain number of years of, oh, let's try this one, let's try that one, we wanted to sort of kind of circle back to like the central ritual of the Seder is reading, reciting, talking about the Haggadah text itself. And the Haggadah text itself is remarkably hard to find. This page actually has none of the traditional Haggadah text in it at all. This is a little phrase that is sort of like added by certain communities, but this is like a little preparatory thing. But this is not actually. We haven't even started the text of Magid yet. Here, at least, we have the text of Halach Ma'anya here on this in this little corner. But they're very big books that fill up your table. There's so much stuff, and it can be great to sort of mine all of that material, and it can also be super distracting, hard to find. There are places where you're flipping through 8 or 10 pages to get to the next line of the text. Then there are so many beautiful Haggadot. They're vehicles for amazing creativity and art. Aside from being able to, this is from the Shik Haggadah, which many of you may remember was a really ubiquitous in the 70s, 80s, and thereabouts. Aside from not being able to buy a set of these, it's actually very hard to read this. I tried once to actually just read the Haggadah text from this. The art is very distracting. And so when I go around and ask people, well, what Haggadah do you use? There, there's some are still using a different night, and other than that, mostly people are using. This is the Ktav Haggadah that I used in school growing up. This is a page from the Maxwell House Haggadah, and aside from the warm, fuzzy feelings and memories, what strikes you about these pages? They're in a certain way very similar.
They are boring.
They are very boring. They are the pages are boring, and they make. And I say, like, you open up this book and you feel like this is going to be a boring ritual. Like it conveys a certain sense about what this ritual is going to be like. Not the feeling that you're really trying to kind of highlight. This is the other very commonly used Haggadah, the art scroll Haggadah, right? For people who want to sort of be able to focus on the text. But again, page after page after page of undifferentiated Hebrew text. Has the little explanation on the side, but every page looks the same. And so I remember growing up feeling like there were nights of just like reading stuff, and one page of stuff wasn't any different than another page of stuff. On this page, this is the end of a Mishnah that's kind of brought in as a digression, and this is the 4 children, and it all looks the same. And the thing is that, and here's where I want to sort of come back to the sort of big picture of the Haggadah. The Haggadah is a crafted liturgy that has really distinct segments with distinct characters and distinct parts of this process. And an effective Haggadah that should facilitate noticing, appreciating, and building off of that richness and those contours. Another page that looks the same. So here is just one page from my Haggadah. It's meant to feel easy to sort of easy and pleasant to use, and to feel like a traditional Haggadah, while also offering things like transliteration, which is very hard to find. It's kind of gives you guidance through the different stages of the ritual, but also the page of Halach Ma'anya, which has one kind of significance in the ritual, feels different than the page of the 4 questions. And here you begin the real main part of the Magid with Abadim Hayinu. It really frames this is a different part of the ritual with a different kind of type of meaning. So I really believe that the book that you're using can map out and can chart out a path through the ritual and can shape what that ritual feels like. Well, here's one of my favorite sort of drawings. The 5 rabbis around the table talking about the Israelites who are leaving Egypt sort of under the full moon. Okay, that's just an introduction about just being able to notice, to kind of surface and highlight the contours of the ritual and of this liturgy text. I'll pause for a moment to see if this to ask on what. Oh, it's noticing my hand when I move it. It's a little too smart. If people have thoughts or questions about the sort of about the pages and the layout before I get into kind of the structure of the liturgy, which is where I want to kind of focus. Okay. Really feel free at any time to kind of pop in and be like, what about this? And think about what are the things that you'd most like to sort of understand more deeply. But I'm now going to find my little source sheet here. I'm going to copy the link and put it in the chat if I can find the chat. Where did the chat go? Oh, there, chat. Chat. Okay, I'm going to share this document, but you are also welcome to open it on your own computers. It might be easier that way. Can you follow it? Okay. There are certain questions about the Haggadah that get asked again and again and again, and the reason they get asked again and again over time is because they never get really sort of satisfactory answers. And if you're like, oh, now I understand, I'm done with that. But one of the central questions that always sort of like the source of conversation is, here's the Haggadah, which is supposed to be the script of this ritual, where we're telling the story, and yet the script doesn't seem to have the story. Right? We've all sort of like scratched our heads about this, wondered about this. Look, well, the Haggadah doesn't tell the story, so how am I gonna bring it in? Am I gonna do a play or have the kids sort of recreate it? But it's odd that we have a liturgy composed specifically for this ritual, and it's missing what seems to be the core. How can that be? So the reason we're missing what we expect to see in the Haggadah ritual is because we're actually looking for the wrong thing. And to understand that, the Haggadah does something, and it does it successfully. And it will help a lot to understand what it is doing and why it is doing that thing, and also why we have a competing idea of what it ought to be doing, and how those two projects are related to each other, and how to and ultimately, when we're thinking about being intentional in constructing a Seder, how those two projects ultimately can be interwoven. But let's start at the beginning, because the Haggadah liturgy is very closely sort of built on the earliest sources that describe the Haggadah. The primary one being the Mishnah. The Mishnah is the first text to do a lot of things, but the first text to lay out a Seder ritual that is surprisingly close to the ritual that we know. And here is how the Mishnah describes what it is that we're supposed to do in Maggid, which we would call the central crux of this liturgy. They pour the second cup. The child asks questions or is guided in asking questions. It has a list of 4 questions. And then the Mishnah says 3 things. Number 1, Lefi da'ato shel ben aviv melamdo. According to the understanding of the child, the father teaches him. This is the idea of tailoring what we're teaching to the child that we're probably all familiar with. Interestingly, I was always taught that the famous midrash of the 4 children is based on, or sort of is kind of developing the idea from this line in the Mishnah. That's probably not true, because the midrash of the 4 children is actually is probably the oldest rabbinic text we have in the Haggadah, and almost certainly this line in the Mishnah is a reference to the reference to that midrash. The idea that there are different types of children really comes from the fact that there are 4 different places in the Torah where the Torah describes the father explaining in 4 different ways to his child what happened in the Exodus, right? And from that we get this line. So the first line is really just is really referring to that midrash. There are different types of children. So, but now, what is the content? Number 1, this is matchil bignut. You start in Shem Musayem B'Shevach, and you end in praise. This is often, by the way, mistranslated as glory, because it kind of feels like the opposite of shame. And when you translate it as glory, it sounds like a story of the Israelites going from a place of degradation to the Israelites going to a place of splendor, glory, whatever. That's not actually what it's saying. Your story has to start with degradation. We were degraded, and end in praise of God. Right? We were degraded, we were oppressed, and God brought us out. God did wonders and brought us to freedom. So really, 1, begin with shame and conclude with praise. 2, Doresh me'aravi oved avi. Explain the passage of my father was wandering Aramean. The passage that we have that we call that big midrash section, kind of in the middle of Magid. The passage itself is a short passage from Book of Deuteronomy. It is a kind of thumbnail summary that we'll take a look at in a few minutes of the Exodus. So that's 2. And then 3, Rabbi Gamliel has his own thing. He says, no. You actually have to, there are 3 main foods of Pesach, right? The meat, the matzah, and the maror. You tell the child what happened in the Exodus by telling him about the foods. That's it. Now that doesn't seem very much. But then the idea of going from shame to praise there are 2 different versions, right? 2 rabbis with 2 different versions of what biblical text to use to tell that story. So now we have two possible texts to use. The passage of my father's wandering Aramean is a 3rd text, biblical text you can use to sort of summarize the story. And then Rabban Gamliel uses the foods instead of the biblical text. And from there we have 4 answers. And we're going to see, we'll kind of go through this in detail next week, that those 4 answers give us the structure for all of Magid. Now, what are those answers trying to do? Here are, here are what I would say are the 3 key kind of biblical sources that describe what we're supposed to tell our children. I want you to just, as we read them, think about what do they have in common in terms of what they mention and what they don't mention and what their message is. Right? 2 of them are from the 3 of them actually, but one of them, appear right in Exodus, right at the tail end of the story of the Exodus itself. The first here, and this is the source for the term Hagaddah and Magid, right? The central mitzvah as the Torah presents it. Vehigadata levincha, you shall explain to your child, you shall tell your child on that day, meaning each year on Pesach, really this is because of but this, the Passover sacrifice, is because of what God did for me when I left Egypt. That's it. That's all they need. It's a ritual, and you tell your child, this ritual is because of what God did for me when I left Egypt. The previous chapter has a slightly more elaborate, more elaborate process. In the version in chapter 12, we do this Passover, the Passover ritual, and then the child actually here asks a question: "Ma ha'avodah hazot lachem?" What's up with this stuff? And the Torah says, not only should you answer the kid's question, but in large part, you were doing this ritual to get the kid to ask that question. So good job, bully you. And when the child asks the question, you think, this is Zevach Pesach Hu Adonai. This is a Pesach, however you want to, we're just going to call it Pesach. This is a Pesach sacrifice to God. Asher, and here's the little wordplay. Asher Pasach al Batei Bnei Israel Mitzrayim, that God passed over the houses of the Egyptians, of the Israelites in Egypt, when Binag Pod Mitzrayim, when God struck the Egyptians. So here I am doing this grand ritual to pique my child's curiosity. The child asks, what's this all about? It is a Pesach because God passed over our homes in Egypt when God struck the Egyptians. That's answer number 2. And now number 3. This is Deuteronomy. He shall havin chalemor. Here again we have an inquisitive child, right? Your child will ask you in time to come, sometime in the future. But this child is not asking about the Pesach sacrifice. In fact, there's no indication that this interchange is intended to happen on Passover at all, or is connected to Passover in any way. Child is asking, Ma ha'edot v'hachukim v'hamishpatim. What are, or what's the meaning of the laws, the decrees, the rules, asher tzivah Adonai Eloheinu etchem? What is the meaning or the purpose of, the source of the laws and the rules that our God has commanded you? So this question is about essentially the whole Torah. Why do we have this whole system of laws and rituals and service? And what is the answer that you, the parent, are supposed to give to the child to explain why we do the whole Torah, why we serve God, sort of in the entire system? The answer is v'amarta lebincha, avadim hayinu lefaro b'mitzrayim. We were slaves in Egypt. Vayotzienu Adonai mitzrayim b'yad chazakah. God brought us out from there with a mighty hand. God brought otot umoftim, right? Some signs and wonders, very sort of frightening and destructive on Paro and Paro's house. Ve'otanu tzimisham, and God brought us out from there to bring us out and to bring us to the land that God had promised. And as part of that, Vayetzavenu Adonai la'asot et hachukim ha'eleh. God, having done all these signs and wonders, having brought us out and to the land that God promised, commanded us to do all of these mitzvot, to learn to fear God, and so that we would fare well. Okay. What do these three passages are the source, they're the biblical source for the idea of for the command of lahagid that defines the Seder night. What do you notice in these sources? What does it feel from these sources? What does it feel like this mitzvah is about? What do you notice that what do they have in common? How do they differ from each other?
They're all different.
They are all different. Okay.
And
What difference jumps out at you?
we're trying to make it as succinct as possible for the kid.
Right. That's one thing.
But
They're all very
different.
short.
Yeah. They all have to do with Egypt. And
Right.
we
Well,
were
that means
saved
that
by God.
yes. I mean, right. Okay. So the fact that they're these are the ones that have to do with Egypt. So that's right. But they have to do with God. Say more about that.
That God did this. He was responsible for this.
Great. Okay. Anyone else? Yeah. Yeah. Tyler, go ahead.
This almost feels like a tautology because it's what you were saying, but the other mitzvot in the Torah are directed at you for yourself. These are it's about the next generation.
So they're all right. It is one of the rare things where it is specifically an activity that is focused on. We're directed. You must convey this to your child. Okay, so there's something very central about that. Okay, so what is it that is so important? What are the main things that we need to convey to our children?
That there's a God who saved us.
There's the God who saved us. Okay.
And we didn't do anything. God did it.
Do
And he did it
you
in
notice in
different
all three of
ways.
these? In all three, right? What you'll notice in all three of these, and in every later biblical text that comes back to and revisits and recaps the events of the Exodus from Egypt, they all focus only on two elements. We were slaves. We were oppressed. Some of them will go into a little more detail describing the Israelites suffering. We were oppressed, we suffered, and here are the things that God did to save us. Those are the only two elements. In every single one, you go throughout Tanakh. They're all, we were suffering. Here's what God did to save us. Why would that be? Why wouldn't a summary, a recapping of this dramatic, engaging, sort of gripping drama of Exodus chapters 1 to 12? Why would only those elements be repeated? What does that tell you about the purpose of coming back and
Because you can't see God.
Okay.
And for children, especially, you want to be able to see something.
Okay, so
They didn't have the books. The kids didn't have books. They didn't have anything. They can't see God except, okay, Daddy is telling you that there is a God, and this is how he's showing himself to you.
Right. Okay. Well, so what I want to suggest is that it becomes very clear here that the point, the reason the Torah emphasizes the importance of telling the story to your children is not so that they know their history and they know where they came from. In the way that we talk about why it's important to look at pictures of or hear stories of our grandparents and great grandparents, is like you should know what they went through and what they experienced and what and sort of where our family comes from. It's not that, right? We're not telling the Exodus so that our children remember the Exodus. We are instilling in them a sense of awe, indebtedness, gratitude to God. That is the point. And therefore, if that is our goal is, right, we celebrate this holiday, we do this ritual in order to cultivate that sense of awe, that sense of appreciation, then the only story I need to tell is we were in dire straits and God came to our rescue. And God came to rescue in these mind-blowing, amazing, sort of world-changing ways. Because that is going to, my hope is that will instill a sense of belonging to the story, a sense of connectedness to God, and a sense of commitment to being part of the community of mitzvot, right? Which fundamentally is no different than, when it comes down to it, how we think of Jewish education today. Like we think about the Jewish education we're providing our children in terms of, is this going to cultivate in them a sense of love for the tradition and investment that will make them engaged and active and practicing Jews, right? That is the Seder, right? It is a simple message of cultivating, of reminding the children of God's gift.
What's very interesting is that you have, yeah, we're reminding the kids, but we're doing it without anything very concrete, actually.
Right. So
Whereas if they have, in the Egyptians and the other peoples had idols and whatnot. Now, the Jewish kids, the Israelite kids, they never saw these idols, presumably.
Okay,
But
but the theology of monotheism and of a God without idols is certainly a piece of this. But what I really want us to appreciate is that goal, that motivation, that motivation feels clear when you look at the biblical sources, and it's clear how that motivation would lead to a simple and sort of and tertiary telling that focuses on the thing that we want them to really imbibe, which is our need and God's rescue. Now, the problem is we have this very different concept of what's supposed to happen at our starim. And I didn't put it in here, but it's easy when you look at Maimonides, right? When he begins his laws of the Seder, right? What is the central thing that you're required to do at the Seder? It is mitzvah to lisaper, to tell the story, to narrate, to discuss the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim. And the more you can elaborate on it, the deeper you can get into it, the better, right? That's our picture of what the Seder is about. Because, in fact, the Hagaddah says that, right? Even afilu kulanu chachamim, even if we're all wise and learned and steeped in Torah, it's a mitzvah to talk about to lisaper b'Yetziat Mitzrayim, and the more the better. And then we have this story of the 5 rabbis who do just that. The first thing I want you to notice is that when you look at it this way, normally in a Haggadah, this little paragraph right here is part of the paragraph that starts Avadim Hayinu, and so you always read it as one continuous paragraph. That is absolutely wrong, turns out. The first half of the paragraph is one thing. We will look at what it is, and we may get to looking at it carefully next week. But the second half of the paragraph is not part of that at all. It is the introduction to the story of the 5 rabbis. And when you look at these two pieces together, it becomes kind of obvious, right? Even if we were all chachamim, we were all learned and wise and elders, and knew the whole Torah, it would be a mitzvah lisaper, right, to recount, right, Yetziat Mitzrayim, and the more the better. And look, here's a story about the 5 greatest rabbis ever, right, the 5 great giants of the central of the sort of the pinnacle generation of Tanaim, doing literally exactly that. Oh my gosh. Who'd have thunk it? Well, they hopefully they had all night. They must have thunk it at some point. But right, the story is they're doing exactly that. They're sitting around in Bnei Brak. They are misaprim b'Yetziat Mitzrayim. They're talking about Yetziat Mitzrayim all night until they're so wrapped up in it that their students have to say, "Hey, Rabbanan, it's time to daven." Now, it's interesting that their students were apparently not invited to this discussion, right? They were sitting outside and they went to sleep, right? And then had to come in and then, but right, that's the idea. The problem is this verb, misaprim, with the meaning of kind of narrate or discuss, in all of rabbinic literature of every genre, appears in relation to the Exodus only in this text, only in the Haggadah, nowhere else. There's no Talmud text, or no Midrash text, or no other liturgy text that uses that verb to talk about Yetziat Mitzrayim. And that's odd, given that it's literally the defining word for what we think we're supposed to be doing. And another strange thing, it turns out that this story does have what we call a parallel, we call an antecedent, right? An earlier version. There's an earlier version of this story. The earlier version of the story is from the Tosefta, so it's really from the time of the Mishnah, from like the early 3rd century. And here's the earlier version of the story. Tosefta is even the Tosefta in this case is even earlier than the Mishnah, right? So this is right? This is the Seder in its first stages of development. Okay, the end of the description of the Seder. Ein maftirin achar Pesach havikom. We know that the last law of the Seder description, right? We know that because we tell the wise child, you tell him all of the laws of Pesach up until the very last one about the Efikon, right? So ein maftirin achar Pesach. That means you don't eat anything after the Efikon, anything after the Pesach. Period. Paragraph. The Seder is now done. After the Seder's over and you've cleared up, says the Tosefta, chayav adam la'asok behilchot haPesach kol halayla. After your Seder's done, you're not obligated. If you are a rabbi and sage and part of this circle of Tanaim, you are supposed to study the laws of Passover all night. And then it says, "Afilu b'nei b'no," even if it's just you and your son, even if it's just you and yourself, even if it's you and your student, meaning the situation where you don't really have a chavruta to like really analyze, to really sort of get into discussing the halachas with, even if it's just you by yourself or with a little kid, whatever. You're supposed to spend the whole night of Pesach discussing halacha after the Seder's done. Now, how do I know that these two that this Hagaddah story is a version of this earlier story? There are simply way too many sort of detail and linguistic parallels for it to be otherwise. From the group of rabbis sitting misubim, right, sitting around specifically on the night of Pesach and studying and discussing something all night until the break of dawn when they have to go to pray. The two-part text, or first. It tells you what you're supposed to do, and then it tells the story of people who actually did it. It's very clear that the Hagaddah text is based on this text, but a few things are changed, right? Instead of this section, which is, even if you're by yourself or with your kid, right? Instead it becomes, even if you're wise and learned and know the whole Torah, you still have to do this. So the words are the same, but the meaning is very different. And obviously, instead of spending the night studying halacha, the rabbis in our story spend the whole night discussing Yetziat Mitzrayim. Now, I can tell you that this Hagaddah version of the story, it first appears in a manuscript of the Hagaddah. Remember, it only appears in the Hagaddah. There's nowhere else. We have nowhere else that it's not taken from anywhere else. It first appears in manuscripts in the Hagaddah in the 9th century. And given what we know about the transmission of the Tosefta and other things, it is, let's say, fairly certain that this version of the story was only created in around the 8th or 9th century. That makes this story one of the last texts to be added to the Hagaddah liturgy. And what that means is that the rest of the Hagaddah was put together based on the idea that the mitzvah of the Seder night was lehagid, was to simply and concisely convey a sense of awe and an appreciation for God's miracles. The end. That is the goal. The whole, all of Magid is in fact that. It's Magid. It is striving, right, with these, there are these 4 different versions of exactly how to do it, but each of the versions is a concise conveying of the events of the Exodus that focuses only on describing our sort of oppression and despair and the wondrousness of how God came to our rescue. Or, in the words of the Mishnah, going from Gnut, from our shame to praise of God. None of it has this idea of lisaper. So we come into the evening expecting lisaper, but the Hagaddah was written to do something else. It was written lahagid. It's a ritualized affirming of that of gratitude, and therefore of our connection to and relationship to God, and bringing our children into that relationship, and therefore into that community of love and the community of service of God. Now, I don't want to suggest for a moment, and I see we're running out of time. I don't want to suggest for a moment that this idea of Sipur is therefore misguided. What it represents is a major shift in thinking about what should happen on this night and what kind of conversation will cultivate that sense of connectedness. And it has proved to be a hugely important and even invaluable reorienting of how this ritual can serve to perpetuate our sense of community. It is also true, I will say, that there are times that complexity is hard, and that there really are also times for simplicity and times for talking about an uncomplicated relationship. But I want us to think of, but I invite you, I want us to sort of approach this ritual understanding these 2 kind of competing modes of conversation. Lahagid, right? Which is more ritualized and more simple and more directive, and really is the text of the Hagaddah, and lisaper, this much broader, more amorphous idea of immersing ourselves. It's not just the case that, it is the case that the Hagaddah was written before they had this idea of lisaper, but also it is also true that you couldn't really write a script for lisaper, because lisaper, to immerse yourself in that telling, has to be always evolving, developing, changing, always drawing on our creativity. I'm going to stop there. Do we have time for a couple questions, or we're just about out of time?
Hi, if I can jump in, if you have time and there's anyone that wants to ask questions, certainly, we'd love to answer. And if anyone needs to jump off, they'll jump off. But just want to jump into Rabbi Cahan. It's wonderful to have. And just a quick reminder, because I'm going to need to jump and put myself on mute in a minute, but just a reminder that next week and the week after, Thursday evening, we have Rabbi Cahan back with us for this series on delving into the Hagaddah as we get ready for Pesach. So thank you, and we'll turn over if there's any questions.
Questions or thoughts or reactions? Yeah, you can feel free to just jump in.
Do you think in any sense that the differing focus between Lahagid and Lasaper might have to do with the leader and the stage of life?
I think that when we're leading a Seder, we're always we're always navigating that. I think we're doing it. We generally do it unconsciously, but it is. But it's actually really helpful to be able to be aware of those two poles, and therefore to sort of to be willing to be able to make a decision. Like this year, I need to sort of emphasize one of the modes, or this year we're really ready to shift into another. Yeah, Naftali, you had a.
Yeah, I was just wondering, where can we find a copy of yours that you were showing us? Because I liked the way it looked.
Yeah. You know what? I'm gonna find the link right now, and then I'm gonna post to you, and I will also hopefully they'll we will talk a lot more about my Hagaddah next week, as we kind of go through, sort of we'll spend our time next week really inside the Hagaddah, and we'll go through a bunch of the pages and look at how this kind of concept kind of translates into the ritual itself. The idea for me, the idea of Hagaddah, of any ritual, is for everyone to be on the same page, for everyone to be able, right, which means almost all of the text is transliterated, and there's translations that you can read. Like my family always, we're going around the table and reading. Some people read in English, and we had so many painful years of people reading really terrible English. It was really important to me that, like, if you're reading in English, it feels like a meaningful and engaging text, which it is. And so it's not ramming, right? Every comment there. I had two rules for every comment. First of all, every comment except for, like, there are a few full page instructions, but, like, every comment can be read in the time that it takes to recite the Hebrew text on that page, right? So that if you're kind of spacing out while people are reading, like, you read that, right, you'll be done by the time they turn to the next page, and you never have to flip pages to look for the next part of the text. And every one of those comments I gave to somebody who has no Jewish background and asked, does this make sense? Can you read this and follow it? And I gave it to someone who, a rabbinic colleague, and I asked, does this feel like there's some nugget that in here that you hadn't thought of before? And the only ones that stayed in were the ones that got yeses on both.
That's pretty cool.
I mean, that, right? The idea. We can all be in the same, right? We're all in the same ritual. Okay.
And as a convert, that really speaks to me, being able to understand and know what it's being said. So thank you for that.
Well, it is so important that that you and all the different types of people coming to our seders can feel like they are. I mean, we literally say in the seder more than like we say at the beginning, you know, all who are hungry, come and eat. All who need a place to be, come and join us. And the text that you put out goes a long way towards creating that text. Any last questions before we sign up? So next week we will get to really kind of look through the Hagaddah itself and kind of have a quick tour and hopefully both an appreciation for how the texts are presented and laid out, and that hopefully will give you a sense that you can kind of see the big picture, you can see the forest and not get lost in the morass of the trees, which is so easy to have happen as you're sort of like pushing through the text of this ritual. All right, I look forward to next week. Meantime, go matzah shopping and be well.